Good morning, Amy, Carmen, and Sandra.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do we have any apologies this morning? I've got an apology for lateness from Mark, from Councillor Mark.
Full apologies from Ewan, although he isn't a member.
Yes.
And partial attendance from Mayor Southgate.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. Right. I'm having trouble printing out that blimmin' run sheet for today, so I'm going to have to use it off the screen after all.
Oh, okay.
That's right. I should be able to flip between screens. Oh, yeah, there they are.
Morning, Madam Chairperson.
Morning, Councillor O'Leary. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Crazy level 2 yet again.
Yeah, I think so. Crikey. We've been able to visit Rosie Ray in the hospital, but because of level 2,
Oh,
we
yes.
can't now. It's just Thomas and Sophie, which has been a bit of a shame.
Oh.
Yeah.
How is she doing?
She's doing really well. Really,
Oh,
really
good.
So she's been moved out of the high dependency kind of room to the next room now. So that's nice.
Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah.
You're a nana. Are you a nana, a grandma? What's your thing?
Yeah, I'm a grandma.
You're a grandma. You're going to be grandma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely.
See how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's just fantastic.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
How much did she weigh?
5'5".
Okay, cool.
Yeah, which is pretty good for a preem baby.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, she did really well. And the procedure all went really well.
Good. That's good. I think it's fairly common these days, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd never heard of it. But
Yeah.
it's not as uncommon as you think.
No, I have one of my cousin's babies was born with that, and they had the operation, and everything was fine. And and a friend's, someone in my friend's family, the same thing happened last year. Yeah, so no, quite common.
Yeah. And they make a full recovery. Well, 95% of them apparently make a full recovery, and off they go. So that's great.
Yeah, cool.
Righto, we're nearly ready. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Kesh. Morning, Norm. Norm, are you okay for karakia this morning?
Yep. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm all right for karakia.
Cool, thank you. And we're not doing the Waikato at the end. It's just going to be impossible on Zoom.
I got it ready too.
Oh.
Just gonna do a, what do you call those ones when you do it by yourself and you're really good? Well, that's not me.
Oh, that sounds cool. So what's our time? Who have we got there? Carmen. Morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Morning.
We do have quorum now, Margaret, so you are able to begin.
To go. Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome to our first Environment Committee meeting 2021. And we've got enough to get started. So we've got a reasonably full agenda, and I propose to take breaks today at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, and then we'll just see how we go after that. Very good. So let's get underway. First of all, I have some apologies, have a partial apology from Mayor Paula.
You want to do karakia now?
Sorry, Norm. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Kia ora tātou morena. Kararo I te korowai o te atua. Under the cloak of our Heavenly Father, let us have a quick karakia. E tō mātou I te rangi, tēnei mātou, he whakamoimiti, whakawhetati kia koe. Ho mai kia mātou I tēnei wā te aroha, te ture me te whakapono. Ko I karaiti hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmene.
Amen.
Just for translation's sake, I just sort of sought strength, love, and peace in our discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's a lovely way to start our meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So our apologies today, a partial apology from Mayor Paula. She will be attending, but not the full meeting. And an apology for lateness from Councillor Mark, and a full apology from Councillor Ewan. Although he's no longer a member of this committee, he still wants to submit his apology as well. So I'll move those apologies. I'll have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Sarah. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, raise your hand. Thank you. Those against, that's carried. Now I'll also confirm the agenda. I'll move to confirm the agenda. Do I have a seconder for that? Thanks, Councillor Marga Norm. Again, all those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against, that's carried. Any declarations of interest this morning? There being none. Good morning, Councillor Maxine. And item 4, there is no public forum this morning. No speakers have requested to present at this time. So we'll move to item 5, confirming the Open Environment Committee minutes of our previous 2020 meeting, 1st of December. I'm happy to move those minutes. Thanks, seconded by Councillor Sarah. Any questions or discussion around the minutes? Very good. Okay, all those, we'll take that vote. So confirming the agenda, all those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those against, that's carried. Right. Now to start with, we do have our, sorry, just moving between screens here. We do have our first presentation of the morning from, and this will be via Zoom, and this is a Waikato Tainui climate change update. Are we ready to go ahead with that, Amy?
Perfect, and we do have Manaki here.
Great, Manaki. Tēnā koe, morena, welcome.
Morena.
Thank you for making time to come to present to our Environment Committee meeting, Environment Committee this morning, Manaki. Really appreciate your workload. Actually, we have been trying for a wee while, so I really appreciate you being here today, albeit via Zoom. So, we're really interested in the environmental actions and how Waikato Tainui are moving in that direction, and really look forward to your presentation this morning. So we've asked Manaaki for just to 30 minutes this morning, and that includes questions from us. So,
Kia ora. Kia ora, Margaret. Nō reira, tēnā tātou, e mihi mana kia koutou I tēnei ata. E te tūnani, tēnā koe, mō te karakia. Nō reira, tēnā tātou. Yes, thank you, Margaret, Madam Chair, for the, I guess, yeah, as you say, the opportunity to be here whilst it's in the Zoom environment. Hopefully I'll be able to just, I guess, get across to the committee sort of the mahi that Waikato Tainui are undertaking around climate change. So thanks to Amy and the team. I'll let her push the buttons, otherwise I'll get lost in the screens and you'll probably see emails that you don't need to see. So I guess sort of just to start with, for the last couple of years, like many organisations, we've been looking at climate change and its impact that it is having and will continue to have into the future. So 2019 actually, we went through engaging with our marae and our tribal parliaments around what does climate change mean for us. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we were unable to run it past for our tribal governance to actually get sign off, but we managed to get executive sign off on it. So what I'm just going to present to you today is just a short snapshot, but I guess I want to really talk more about sort of the things we are doing on a practical level. So if you can hit the button for the next one, please, Amy. So as stated, so for us, Waikato Tainui recognise that climate change is one of the most significant issues that will impact the long-term well-being and prosperity of our marae whānau hapu and our iwi. And so we require an intergenerational approach that gives the best of ourselves to create a sustainable future. So obviously that's a big part, is about ensuring that whatever we do today is sustainable for our mokopuna 10, 20, 100 years from today. Next slide, thanks, Amy. Our principles, so I guess, and I'm just sort of reflecting on, I understand that Hamilton City Council have 4 pillars by which you are looking at your climate approach around building understanding, deliver a change across your sectors, a climate accord, and collaborating in capacity building. So our key principles kind of embed some of that, but ours was really based on our whenua, our wai, and our whānau. And I'll assume that everybody's seen this, has this information, so I'll allow you to read that in your own time. But obviously for us, the health and well-being of our whenua is a reflection of the health and well-being of our people. Our wai, our relationship with and respect for our waterways give rise to our responsibility to protect the mana and mauri of our water bodies. And the health and well-being of our iwi, hapu and marae whānau is vital for our own sustainability and prosperity. So those are our key principles and our aspirations, and a lot of those derive from our key strategic documents such as Whakatapuranga 2050, Te Ture Whaimana, or the vision and strategy under the Waikato River Authority, and Te Mana o Te Awa. So those are key. From a settlement perspective, they also come from our 95 settlement, our Raupatu land settlement, and then 2008, our river settlement. So these are some key principles that are embedded in some key strategic documents. Our action plan, thanks Amy, the next slide. Keeping with those key headings, I guess those key po in our regard. So obviously we want to look work alongside our marae around and our whānau around how we respond to climate change and what our solutions are. Looking at the water aspirations, obviously for us is to continue to advance and protect our waterways, all of our water bodies, and obviously looking at the aspirations of our whānau and how they might get engaged in some key climate change accords or commissions. So those have been kind of key to our action plan. And so the next slide, thanks Amy, I'll talk to what some of those actions are. So just under our whenua aspirations, one of the things that we've had during COVID, like many of us, we actually had to do a bit of a pivot and look at our resiliency. So much of our actions are based on our resiliency. What we learned from COVID from a iwi perspective was how unsustainable we were, in that our whānau were unable to, you know, there was power poverty, water poverty, all of those sorts of things. So we had to look at what our resiliency would be for our whānau moving forward. So some of the things that we've looked at, particularly under our resiliency plan, Amohia Ake, was around some solar power farms. So we're in the process through engaging with some whenua that we've got around the development of solar power farm. Still in the early stages around what that would look like, and how we would utilise that opportunity to minimise impact around, you know, power poverty, which was evident when we did when we reached out to many of our whānau, and obviously particularly those whānau that were in the most isolated communities. Our iwi nursery, so like many, and I think in the Waikato we have about 4 nurseries. And so what we were looking at, and that's probably in response to our biodiversity and our restoration programs, our iwi nurseries, iwi forestries. So looking at how we can contribute to that biodiversity with the growth and development of our native species. With regards to our iwi forestry, linking into He Paurangi from the Climate Commission. So there's, you know, there's the carbon sinks and how we transfer, or how we look at native forestry. So part of the work that we're doing along with Tiny Group Holdings and against all early stages is looking at how do we convert the forestries that we currently have into the native, into a native, you know, native forest. Noting that it's going to be a long-term game that we have to play around that. So just in terms of those are some of the things that we've been looking specifically around our whenua. With regards to our water, we're in a key part of what we've been looking at around is water storage. And in particular, our focus has been on our lands in Rauhi Pōkeka and Huntly. We have a number, particularly our solid energy land, so our open cast mines. So we're working with WSP around what does water storage look like, you know, and all the technical aspects that come with water storage. So we're looking at that around how we can, you know, build this resiliency with regards as water becomes gold. We all know that water is gold. It's one of those resources that is becoming more and more scarce. And so we're looking at what does water storage look like, particularly if we take into consideration, and we look at our tupuna awa, and we look at the river and how over allocated we are. So we are in a system that's over allocated anyway. And so the impact that that's having on our river. So we're obviously looking at that. So how do we, from an iwi perspective, how do we minimise the impact of allocation, and take, you know, our responsibility as a kaitiaki for our river. So yeah, so early, again, we're in phase 2 of that conversation. We still have a couple more years lease on the open mines with Genesis and Solid Energy. So we're just working through that process. But again, we're preparing and planning for the future. And so water storage is one of those things. Connected to the water storage, we're also looking at our wetlands and obviously lake restoration. And if we look at Rauhi Pōkeka particularly, we're looking at Lake Wāhi. And so we're looking at an opportunity when we look at the water storage and where it will be physically positioned around how we can utilise some of that process to be a flushing system to help with the restoration of Lake Waihi, so that it can again become what it was in terms of mahinga kai, and the biodiversity that's set around that. So those are part of the things that we're looking. Obviously, we're looking at our wetlands in the lower catchments, sort of down towards Tuakau, Rangariri, and all our lakes that are connected to the waterways, so the tributaries, the water tributaries that are attached to those. So those are some of the pieces of work. And again, part of the thinking around that is we obviously need to restore as much as we can to the natural environment based on the mātauranga we know, which has indicated to us is that, in a very ever-changing world, and particularly with regards to climate, one of the things that we need to, I guess, re-establish is actually working in with the environment as opposed to us determining what the environment should look like. So when I talk about the wetlands, is, we've got some natural wetlands that have been removed for farming, for farmland. And so we're looking at, and we've had some of these lands returned, so how do we return those environments back to what they were? So if I take Lower Meremere, Mercer, or Henewai, there's a number of pieces of land there that, when flooded, it would be a natural wetland. And so we were looking at what those look like and how we move on that. With regards to our whānau, so some of the things that we're looking at, and I think under He Paurangi, some of the stuff that the Commission has identified is, so we're looking at, so if I take housing development, so we're looking at housing development on a number of, on a continuum around providing home ownership for our tribal members, but we're also looking at it from an opportunity around when we develop our housing, whether it's kariaria or if we look at hupupu development that we're looking at around housing, what we want to look at is what does micro change look like in that space. So what does, what does water storage, or what does water look like in a housing development around having, stormwater, grey water, how do we better utilise some of that within a micro change, and so in our housing development. So those are the conversations that we're having around how do we change when we look at housing development, how do we include the environment in there? So what do the blue and green networks look like for us when we look at housing development? We're looking at some of that alongside Tainui Group Holdings, TGH, with regard to our development in Ruakura. So what does that look like? So we know Ngāti Tamoho down in the Puaha have managed to, with the developers that are coming into the region, they've managed to, I guess, cement some opportunities where any development will also look at water storage, will look at solar power, so that it enables that development to have its own grid for sustainability. And so I think that's what we're trying to look at when we look at housing development, because we know there's a big demand for that. So how do we ensure our developers and our development can take into consideration micro change, and particularly also with our marae development. So from a climate change perspective, we know that our marae on the coasts, if we go out to Kāwhia, by the harbours, we know that they are in some dire straits with regards to subsidence and, all of those things that are happening at the coast. So a big part of what we're doing with our marae is around how do we look at self-sustaining, how do we move our marae. So if we take Maketu, there are some key things that around erosion that we need to consider. So how do we support our marae and move them up higher, and what does that look like? So we're looking at all of those things. Also our marae that sit at the lower end of the river, the lower catchment end, we're also aware of some of the things that are happening there with regards to erosion. So how do we look at work with our marae around development? A few years ago now, we did I worked with a number of our marae around solar panels. And so our marae, mine and Norm's marae, is one of those marae that have solar power. And so again, how do we make sure that when we look at our marae developments, whether it's bricks and mortar or whether it's about investments that our marae want to make, what does that look like for them around being self-sustaining? So those are some of the examples, I guess, that we're doing on the ground to enable us to achieve our principles and deliver on the actions in the previous slides. And just the last slide, please, Amy. Thank you. And again, the last slide, I won't read it out. I think it's really just about what our commitment is, and obviously looking at some of those solutions and from an iwi perspective, from a Te Ao Māori perspective, I think we have some of those solutions and answers that sit within our mātauranga. And so what are we doing, and how do we reconnect with Te Ao Tūro, Te Ao Tawhito, bring Te Ao Hau into that space. So those are some of the levers that we're applying to help our marae to become sustainable for the future. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Manaaki. Very, really, really great to hear what's happening at the coalface, actually, and for Waikato Tainui. And look, we do have some questions. I have the first one here from Councillor Dave.
Thanks, Chair. Margaret, can you hear me all right? Yep, good. Morena Manaaki, thanks for that presentation and the thing we had round beforehand. It was really good to look at. What's your attitude, or Tainui's attitude, towards sewage treatment, which currently puts water of not quite drinking standard, or liquid of not quite drinking standard, back into the river? I'm thinking of things like whether land-based is better, and what going forward, where do you think you might be heading in that? So that's one question. The other one relates to Hamilton Cities has a problem, as all cities in most countries do, with water, with leaching chemicals and residue from vehicle travel off the roads through the stormwater system into the river. And there's not any treatment usually of that, and it certainly degrades water quality. And that's transport's one of the biggest carbon emitters in Hamilton as well. So I'm just sort of, if you like, picking your brains really about those two issues.
Kia ora, Councillor Dave. Look, I'll start with the first question. While I do believe they do interconnect, so I think our position on that. So we're involved, we're engaging with Hamilton City Council as part of the future-proof discussion in wastewater. So all the waters, the three waters, are all part of that conversation. And so, yeah, it's a difficult one, I'll be honest, particularly as you say, Councillor McPherson, in terms of the wastewater and then how it's treated and then the discharge back into our awa. So I think one of the things that we're working through is around how, what is the best, what technology do we have to enable us to have the best discharge water out there? Because the reality of it, if I take the river and I take discharge, it's so complicated but it's a reality of the situation we're in. And so I think from an iwi perspective, we want to ensure that every possible, the highest standard is being applied when we look at the discharge process. And similarly, I think with the land discharge, now I'm not a technician, but really interesting conversations that have come up around that. When you discharge to land, it actually has more of, it's more detrimental than it is if you discharge to the water. And so, because I was of the opinion thinking, discharge to land is better than discharge to the water. But some of from being part of the three waters being led by Jackie Collier within the Hamilton City Council, some of the work that's been done by some of the consultants have indicated that actually when you discharge to land, the implications are greater, particularly on a long term, because potentially those lands can't be used again for any productive purposes. So, yeah, I think it's a balancing act. But from the iwi's perspective, I think we want the highest possible standards. The ideal would be not to discharge back to the water, but given the way the river is at the moment, Councillor, as far as I understand, sometimes some of the discharge water is cleaner than the water that's already in the system. And so that's a big concern, so that, that is a concern for us, is around what is happening in the system that actually sees the discharge being cleaner than some of the water that's already in there. So I think from our perspective is, yeah, we want the highest possible standards. With regards to the leaching, yeah, similarly, that's a tough one. I don't know if we need to plant more trees around the sides of the road to help, increasing our biodiversity, increasing the green networks, as the, to help mitigate, I guess. But again, similarly, I would hope that we have the highest possible standards, whatever they may be, and the technology. And again, I'm mindful that technology in this space is not cheap. But what technology we do have enables us to have the highest possible standards so that we're able to mitigate and minimise the risk to our water and to our lands as we progress. And as we all know, particularly as you say, Councillor, within Hamilton, there's within the whole of the Waikato region, there's a greater demand for housing, and, we're going to start building up. And so what does those have, what are those implications for? So again, it's all part of our planning. What does that look like for the council around what their planning looks like, and what are those, those standards and mitigation strategies, I guess, that will go and play. And then for Waikato, it's like, how do we ensure we can connect with what that planning tools are, what the mitigation strategies could be, and then how we engage in that process.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Manaki.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Dave. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you. Morena Manaki, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting to hear what Waikato Tainui is doing and thinking about. My one question was just around when you're looking at some of these things, say, particularly building houses which integrate more resilience around, say, water storage or other climate impacts and things, what it might be too early to say, but I'm just wondering if you've come up against any barriers in terms of, say, a district plan or otherwise, where actually council has made things harder to actually be innovative in this area. You're laughing.
Yes, so sorry. Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, like everybody, I think the biggest challenge has really been around the RMA. And so I guess with all these reforms they're now in play, the theory is, and I'm not an expert and still in the early stages of the RMA, the theory is now with the shift to the new, the three key areas within the new RMA model, it should get easier, particularly given that climate change is one of those aspects within the RMA. So I would say previously, yes, and I think like any developers or those looking in development have come across barriers or brick walls, and that's not necessarily to do with the council laws or it's part of that system, and so the RMA system has been a big battle. But I guess over the years we've been able to, with the urban growth agenda, so there's been ways in which we are able to manoeuvre. And so I guess, and I think what is interesting though, and I guess like these types of forums and different conversations you have with different councillors or, other leadership is around that climate change is, it is a real thing. And so a lot of the planning and systems are actually just naturally curving towards a way in which enables us to think about, what are we doing and what can we do differently. So I don't think the Climate Commission reports and those sorts of things will change what most people are doing anyway, because I think the reality is we're having unpredictable weather. Climate change is right in our faces, whether we believe it or not. And so I think we've been able to just manoeuvre. But yeah, just in terms of your question, Councillor, yep, we've come up against barriers. But again, I would imagine many people have. And what we're doing from an iwi perspective is we're engaging quite closely with the Crown around the new RMA reform. So we're part, along with other Māori entities such as FOMA, Kahuiwai Māori, Te Wai Māori. So we're part of a collaborative group that are working directly with the Crown to look at what these new reforms will look like, particularly around those spaces, and how do we actually bring into play with those reforms some of the mātauranga Māori.
Okay, thank you.
Ka pai, thank you. Norm, Manga Norm.
Yeah, kia ora e te whananga. Ngā mihi mō tō whakaro I whakatako tō ke wanganui e tātou I tēnei wā. So just acknowledging my cousin actually for her presentation today. She's obviously the brainy one in the family and I'm on the improve. So I did want to just provide some support to one of the answers around the non-point source discharge and point source discharge. I'm doing a bit of work in Ngāti Hawa with all of the manufacturing plants with the Hautapu and OCD and others. And it's a tough one, but the land-based and the treatment, the technical treatment processes that have been on the improve, it's a dual process that's actually the best practice. So it's not one or the other, it's actually both and science has proved that. And the Mātauranga Māori or Māori ometers is the cultural health indicators that have also been designed to help complement it. So it's almost a three-pronged approach towards that one. So I just wanted to come in and tautoko manaki on that answer. I wanted to jump in actually to give my whakaaro, but I thought I'll just be patient because otherwise at the marae you get a growling. But I did want to ask around another example, share another example around Raglan. Raglan is to become one of the most sustainable towns in Aotearoa, potentially the first with regards to its waste recycling and also the idea with Well Energy's investment in terms of their own solar. So if we can mirror and follow the ecosystem that's been adapted in Raglan, across the rohe, then obviously everyone's wins. And I think that's where I'm leading to my question is what's good for Māori is great for everyone. That's what I say anyway. And in regard to the tribal strategy, how do others benefit from that? I know that from a whakapapa point of view, our focus is on our marae, but knowing that within Kirikiriroa we have Māta Waka and we have Tauiwi as well, or other people, the tribal strategy, these benefits towards others. Can you just whakamārama mai ngā hua mō tātou katoa e te whananga?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Norm. So yeah, absolutely agree. So while our focus obviously is on our marae, our 68 marae, our 33 hapu, and our 78,000 tribal members, we know that whatever we do and whatever we set in play will benefit the wider community, and we welcome that. And it's an important part of what we want to do, because the reality is we're all residing on this piece of whenua that's got to house us. So we've all got to play our part around how we protect and maintain and sustain. And so I guess our strategy, it is very much about what we need to do and what resourcing, what leveraging opportunities we have through our settlement to unlock those opportunities. While it's, again, has a lens that's specific to Waikato Tainui, we absolutely embrace that opportunity that it creates for the wider, community. And so, as I said earlier to Councillor McPherson, is that, part of it is, and to Councillor Thompson, is that how do we ensure that when we do our planning, when we do our design, the long-term plans, how do we engage in that process so that we can ensure that we can interject into some of that space that's going to create those greater opportunities. So yeah, we're definitely about ensuring that whatever we do and what we solidify will actually have flow-on benefits for the rest of the wider Hamilton Waikato community.
Just one more, Chair. Just in regard,
quickly,
just
I'm mindful of time.
Okay, just last one. One of the key facets around climate change is education and behavioural shifts in people. And I know that, you know, I've fixed up my bike so I can start biking alongside Sarah and others in regards to climate participation, action, etc. So, what's the tribal strategy around education of people towards behavioural shifts?
Well, I think like everybody, and I think that's part of Hamilton City Council's 4 pillars around collaborating and capacity building. I think that's the big part, is around being able to build the capacity and the knowledge, so that you can, you know, that you can grow the education and knowledge base. So part of that is obviously looking at how do we partner with others to be able to do that. So short of us going out and doing wānanga with our tribal members and our marae, what are those opportunities that sit with others? And again, I go back to the one of your pillars, which I know has been a conversation piece, not just for Hamilton City Council, but for Waikato Regional Council, and is around that climate accord. And I think in the climate accord is where you start to touch upon how do you increase the knowledge, the information that goes out there. So from our perspective is around how do we engage with other like-minded organisations to ensure that we get that information out and provide some of that capacity building, capability building, because that's what it's going to require, is we actually just need to get in front of people to have the conversation. And that takes time. You know, that's the reality for everybody. Like, we're all under pressure. We don't have enough time in the day. So joining up and partnering with key organisations will be a key part, from my perspective anyway, Norm, that we can get better coverage, better resourcing, and probably more consistent information. So that's probably the other key, is that the information that we give and that we share, we have to all buy into and be consistent.
Yep, kia ora for that. Ngā mihi, tēnā koe te whananga.
Cool, thank you. Look, I just do have one question. I see, Maxine, you have your hand raised. I just want to, and I am mindful of time. This, you know, we have a reasonable agenda this morning. Manaki, it's a follow-up question to Norm's, really, around about education and the flow of information just down to the individual level, because I see a lot of your work is aimed at marae level, and presumably that's where the messages and the actions and the examples of how we can store water and how we can be more resilient during these times of climate change. So how much of that information and what opportunities are you taking at marae level to pass that information down at a really practical individual level or whānau level?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Every opportunity we get, we are. So if we're engaging with our marae, obviously the marae is made up of the whānau, so the whānau are coming in. So we're taking every opportunity to engage at that level. We have different forums, taiao forums, that our environment team within the tribe engage with different key marae, key service providers across our rohe. And so we use that opportunity as well. Not something that we've done at the moment, but we are aware that the king has become more and more aware of the situation around climate and climate resiliency. And so part of our conversation is to actually take those to pokai. So we have 27 pokai across our rohe under our tribal umbrella. And so we in every attempt to get out there to have that conversation. But we're also trying to do that particularly with, even at the kohangas. So the kohangas, primary schools, secondary schools. So where we can engage in those avenues, then we'll take every opportunity. As you say, I mean, those are going, as I said, the first slide or the second slide, those mokopuna are the generation that are going to make the change, and not necessarily us. But we need to start putting down those, the benchmarks and the pillars so that they can build that whare. So every opportunity we have, we ensure that we, come down to the most micro level around simplest things from and I think Norm alluded to how the marae practice change what they do around waste, their wastewater or their waste management. A bit like what Whangaroa do, so they, we're working with our marae. So instead of having glad wrap, we've got marae in Karapiro that do the beeswax and each, so at every possible level, we're trying to engage in those avenues.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It was a great answer. I have one more question from Councillor Maxine, and then I'd like to move on. So just a welcome to Councillor Mark, our committee member, and Councillor Gallagher as well. Welcome. Okay, Maxine.
Kia ora, Chair Margaret. Both you and Norm have covered the questions that I wanted to talk about with regard to education and taking that right down to the people level. So kia ora, Manaki, and thank you for your full answers. And I look forward to ways that Hamilton City Council can partner with Tainui to ensure that your programs and those PO are able to be achieved. So thank you, Margaret.
Cool. Thanks, Maxine. Well, there being no other questions, I want to take this opportunity to thank you sincerely for your really thorough and enthusiastic presentation this morning, and thank you to councillors too for your thoughtful questions. Kia ora.
Waikato. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, and to you too. Very good. We have our next information presentation from Waikato Regional
Margaret,
Council.
can we just move and second that item?
Oh, sorry. Well, I'll move. That item's accepted. And can I have a seconder, please? I can't see the whole screen. Councillor.
I think Norm has his hand up.
I can't see him. Thanks, Mangai Norm. Go. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? Thank you, it's carried. Great. Thanks for that, Amy. So our second presentation is via Charlotte, actually, but it'll be from Waikato Regional Council, a climate change update.
Kia ora tātou, ko Blair Dickey tōku ingoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our Waikato Regional Council's Climate Action Roadmap to your committee here. I'll just try to share my screen. Are you seeing that?
Something's starting to happen now. Yes.
And you're seeing the first slide of the presentation, are you?
Yes.
Or a desktop?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I'm joined today by Councillor Jennifer Nicol, Chair of our Climate Action Committee, and I'd like to tender the apologies of Karen Bennett, Manager of the Chief Executive's Office. She is unfortunately busy today, but would have liked to have joined your meeting as well. Proposed to just quickly go through the Climate Action Roadmap, bit of background to it, but also to identify ways in which the WRC has included climate change into decision making, and also just to give you a bit of a summary of regional climate networks in play at the moment as well. Just by way of background, climate change effects are continuing as we speak. Last year, we had quite a bit of global action, storms, fires, but really, compared to previous years, quite underreported. The global imperative was COVID, and also a lot of reporting on US elections, and so the climate situation didn't get the same amount of coverage as previous years. But we're working against a background where we had quite a bit of legislative change within the country as well. 2 changes to the Climate Change Response Act, one known as the Zero Carbon Act, and also the Resource Management Amendment Act in 2020. Now that was primarily related to water reforms, but it did have some very significant climate change elements in there as well. One was the repeal of sections 70A and 104E, which meant that it's incumbent upon us as local government now to consider discharges of greenhouse gases as a contaminant, whereas previously it wasn't. So we have a mitigation as well as an adaptation role. We also had some government reports, particularly in relation to Indigenous biodiversity. We had the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, and we had the Randerson Review, the system reforms. Now, as has been discussed in the previous item, the 3 new proposed pieces of legislation, 2 of those have significant climate change response mechanisms in them, and that's the Strategic Planning Act and the Climate Adaptation. And of course, there are Waikato achievements that we have worked in collaboration with yourselves on, but what I wanted to concentrate on for this presentation was the Climate Action Roadmap. Over the last year or 2, we've had an increasing price of carbon, and that graph there is just goes to show that at the moment we've got a carbon price of $4 a tonne over the surrender price. Carbon auctions start on the 17th of March, so only time will tell what that will mean, but we already know that the equivalent EU price for carbon is about 65 New Zealand dollars a tonne at the moment. We needed to start with the future in mind, and what were the projections for the Waikato region, and we had some work commissioned by Clim Systems, and what we found is that we, like the rest of the country, can expect temperature increases, changes in the way we receive water, but particularly seasonal shifts, and that will play out predominantly in the area north of Hamilton, Te Araha and east. So those are the areas where we're likely to see the most dramatic changes. Of course, we see sea level rise, but I'm thinking of relevance to your city at the moment, so we won't go into that. So we have some national targets, regional targets, and our corporate target to work towards. So those are the things we had in mind, but also we needed to look at the regional evidence base. And so what we have got is 3 key documents here. One was the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory, the joint piece of work we did with territorial councils around the region, plus expectations of the future climate over the century. I'll just summarise that, and also our corporate emissions profile and plan to reduce those. We looked at the legislative requirements that we have to address climate change, and recognise that those are changing with the RM Amendment Act 2020. And we also know with the RM reforms that these will change further, as they are a major drive. Climate change is a major drive for those reforms, and with housing imperatives driving the pace of the reforms. So yeah, the future will be quite different. Wanting to move now, that's the context, onto the roadmap itself. Talked about the case for action, but also to recognise that the roadmap is comprehensive in that it deals with both adaptation and mitigation activity. It took a stock take of our sphere of influence, that is the roles, functions and activities that the council is involved in, and synthesize these into 9 response pathways. Now I know in your agenda you've got a copy of the roadmap, so I won't go into too much detail of those, but we can sort of explore a few a bit later on. And did so within a clear evidence base and a desire to understand mātauranga Māori in relation to how do we address climate actions into the future. Those are the 9 pathways, and these are all in, and they include not just how climate change is affecting the roles, responsibilities of the organisation, but how we can actually turn these around to make it easier for citizens to reduce emissions, but also to be more climate resilient. So what is the roadmap itself? It's an internal document. It provides a view of how interconnected the activities of the organisation are, what's our sphere of influence, but primarily it is what we can bring to the party to work with others to address something that's affecting us all. It's not a regulatory document and it's not financially binding. All of the commitments and activities that are identified as what we could do in those pathways need to be run through a local government act mechanism such as LTP, annual plans and the like. This is perhaps a summary of the DNA, if you like, of the roadmap, recognising that all of our activities are somewhere on this spectrum. We're either involved in mitigating our effects on the climate, and that's about emissions reduction, or we're about adaptation and helping communities to be resilient. And that's in relation to how we manage water. And it's either too much of it, floods, not enough of it, droughts, or sea level rise. Just want to take a bit of time just to go through and identify and just draw to your attention a number of the pathways, particularly the afforestation pathway, which relates to pathways 4 and 7. 4 is revegetation, 7 is biodiversity, biosecurity. And one of those areas that we're looking at is the identifying areas that will benefit from afforestation. Regionally, there's 523,000 hectares of highly erodible land that's currently in grass. Now, some of those, some of that area would benefit and create more climate resilience if it were vegetated. It has a mitigation opportunity there with carbon sequestration, and it has an adaptation with respect to, excuse me, catchment hydrology, overall catchment hydrology as well, particularly the extension of life of downstream lowland flood protection, flood management infrastructure and the like. Biosecurity is quite important to consider in this context. We're certainly looking at that from an adaptation perspective, recognising that with fewer frosts, we perhaps have less constraints on pest species, and also we recognise that there is a biodiversity gain from this, and it's not just in relation to terrestrial land use, but also recognising that the opportunities available through the RM reforms will allow us to identify where we can maximise supporting green infrastructure. Another pathway I thought you might be interested in is transport, and certainly one of the mechanisms or responses in the roadmap is to use existing mechanisms to work through the collaborative processes through RLTC, RLTP, and recognise that mode shifts are going to be needed. With emissions reductions, we don't have a lot of those tools. A lot of those tools are central government. for instance, input controls on the internal combustion engines and high emission vehicles and that sort of things. We can't control that, but we do have the opportunity by working together for land use planning, urban form, and making decisions so that it doesn't consign communities to high carbon lifestyles. So making it easy for people to do the right thing effectively. One of the other areas that we can work together certainly on is energy. The Regional Council has some direct involvement in the allocation of hydro, of water, of geothermal energy, and of marine energy sources, but we don't in relation to solar and wind. They're not consentable resources. They're managed on the effects of the technology. So that's the effects of the use of land. That's a district council function under the current RMA. And so that's why those, and also biofuels, which is a land use. So those are covered in the regional policy statement, which brings together the regional plans, access to common resources, and district plans, the management of effects of the use of land. So again, we're in the situation where we have the opportunity to make it easy for people to do the right thing and to access renewable forms of energy, and particularly looking to the future, the co-location of forest residue with geothermal heat and the potential therefore biofuels, the potential as well in the coastal marine area. There's no district plan in the coastal environment. That is the coastal plan. And so there is the opportunity for marine-based wind as well. Just moving on, a couple more slides now, and perhaps Councillor Nicol, you may want to make some comments on this one. Certainly in June last year, our council required resolved to require a change to the committee and council reporting template so that council could have confidence that when making decisions that affected people's lives, that climate change was factored into the decision-making process. And those are three elements of mitigation, adaptation, and leadership. First two relate to mitigation. So one of the elements, and we provide guidance in the change to staff so that we can do this, and just making sure that it's recognised if emissions will be increased or will they be decreased. If they're increased, by how much? Why are we still doing it? Will it make it harder for citizens or businesses within the region to reduce emissions by that decisions? So those two are the elements in relation to mitigation. The adaptation ones is this decision going to be fit for a future climate? And what representative concentration pathway have you used? How do we know? And or will it increase community resilience? And that's based on the projections that we have. And so those are the elements of decision making that we've included. Councillor Nicol, do you want to make a comment here or leave it to the end?
I'll leave it to the end.
Sure. Okay, one more slide, and that is just to give you a bit of an update on where the regional and interregional climate actions are at the moment. As I mentioned, the roadmap itself was an internal document. It's what we can do. So we've got to work with others, and obviously there's the Waikato plan. They have a climate change project, which at the moment is in very early days. It's doing a stakeholder inventory on finding out who's involved, what they're doing. There's the Waikato Wellbeing Project, and that's the localising of the SDGs, and we've certainly, that's what we've incorporated into the plan. That's the reduction of 25% of regional emissions by 2030. And we've got the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance, and that's quite pivotal because I mentioned before of the big the most dramatic changes we're expecting is the way we get water i.e. rainfall, seasonal shifts in that area north of Hamilton, basically. And the Upper North Island Alliance includes councils Bay of Plenty, Auckland, Northland, Waikato, and also the big metros within that area, including yourselves. And one of the key things to recognise and remember is we're all falling into that, into what NIWA call subnational climate zone 1. So we're all got similar climate projections for the future. And that's half the population of the country, or 53% at the moment. So it's quite significant that we've got the opportunity to work with those other councils to address this together. There's a regional local climate officers network, and that's just starting out. And we report back at the moment, the UNISA Climate Officers Group reports back to the combined regional forums. That's the resource management planners, corporate planners and strategic planners that work, that meet quarterly. And there's a myriad of bespoke community climate networks. And really, I think, Councillor Nicol, that's probably a cue for you to mention your thoughts on this.
Sure. If it's all right, Chair Margaret, I'll just mention a couple of minutes worth of my experience, and then we can get into hearing from all of you, because my main outcome is I would like to partner between Regional Council and Hamilton City Council to get some work done together on the same page. And so this roadmap is great for communicating to you in that way. I mean, I've been incredibly blessed to come in to the Regional Council, first-term councillor, chair of Climate Action Committee, and I have this amazing work that has been happening over the past few years that we were able to pull together just over the last year. And so, I mean, we've set climate as our strategic priority. We started considering it in all our decisions with a simple template change, which has been really useful. We have integrated it through all of the work streams so that it's not just an add-on on the side where you have like a climate budget or anything of limited size. It's actually through everything. And then now we have the roadmap. And through the Climate Action Committee, I'm really trying to achieve its terms of reference in that we are providing that guidance at the regional level of mitigation actions that would be really useful. The greenhouse gas inventory has been critical to that. And then adaptation as well. So having a lot of conversations with communities, just starting up over the last little while, and that'll ramp up massively once the RMA reforms are through. And we have a bit more guidance as to how the options might look for communities that do one day have the sea lapping on their doorstep. So, but really around the pathways that are of particular interest that have been mentioned, water storage and quality is obvious. I mean, Auckland showed us that, so that's a really great opportunity. Planting is, as I know, something with your plan that you're putting out for consultation, something that features highly, and particularly transport, because it is the second largest category of emissions in the Waikato, and it is massively focused around Hamilton. We actually had a presentation last week ahead of the Climate Action Committee meeting by Dr. Paul Winton, which was fascinating and recorded. So we'll be able to share that with you because he makes it very clear that with all the confidence of an engineer, that it's all about the next 9 years. We may as well not even talk about 2050. We've got to talk about the next 9 or 10 years, and that's where it's got to happen. And his other quote that really stuck with me was, buses and bike lanes are not a condiment, they are the main event. And so when I look at things like the regional land transport plan that we have out for consultation at the moment, I can see it's still created with the thinking of yesterday, and it does, I hope there'll be a lot of great submissions coming in on that. So with that, I really look forward to hearing your questions, and thank you for letting Blair and I present to you today.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Blair, have you finished your presentation?
Yes, there's only one more slide, and that was just to advise you where you could get copies of the roadmap from. So yes, that is finished.
Great, thank you very much. And I've got questions from Councillor Dave, then Councillor Sarah.
Thanks, Chair Margaret. Thanks, Blair and Jennifer. I actually, on the transport area, which is what I want to question on, I found your two sets of comments a little bit different, because Jennifer, I think you quite rightly identified the regional land transport plan as being, well, I'd call it very deficient. So I think you were probably saying somewhat deficient and in need of change. Blair, you were saying there's very little the region can do to affect it. It's mostly at a national level, but investment in transport, is it not, within a region is primarily guided by the regional transport plan. So I'm sort of wondering, to me, we have a thing in the Hamilton City Council called coffee table books. To me, this is a coffee table book in the transport area, unless it can materially, your climate plan here, unless it can materially affect the major contributor to emissions in Hamilton, which is transport. But we, through the whole process of the Regional Land Transport Plan and the Regional Transport Committee, are stymied from elevating things like the must-have buses that you just talked about in cycleways, Jennifer. We're stymied from elevating them above roads. So if you look at your own regional transport plan, it's roads, roads, roads down to about number 10 or 11 priority. So I'm sort of want some commentary from you about that, because unless I'm going to chuck it on my coffee table, we need some ways of changing that problem.
Fair enough. We do need to. I think we're just stuck at a crossroads here where the way that things have always been done is definitely not going to work anymore. We've kind of probably been saying, oh, it could be a better way, and how do you ever get a integrated network that actually works together when you're actually coming up with funding from different TAs one at a time? I truly believe it needs some editing, and that's probably where Blair's points come in around, there's some central government support that's needed for that to change.
Could your own climate, sorry, the name of your committee escapes me on the region, sorry, Jennifer, it's good you've got one. Could that submit to its own council, to the regional transport plan?
I'm told that we could. We've only just had our meeting, and so timing wise it might not work out, but at the same time I'll certainly be bringing that to the regional council table when the next opportunity strikes.
One from the chair would be good.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Chair Margaret.
If I may just add, I didn't mean to add any confusion into that. I think we're on the same page. I mentioned that we didn't have all the tools, that we would be working through the present mechanisms, but I just gave as an example import controls. We can't stop high emitting vehicles coming over the Bombay Hills, that sort of thing from a regional perspective. I apologise if I created confusion there, Councillor.
Thanks.
Thank you, Blair. It's Councillor Sarah, then Manga Norm.
Thank you, Chair Margaret. Thanks, Blair and Jennifer, for your presentations. I was just interested in, well, agreed that RLTP needs some editing, but also that interested in the restoration side of things, what work has the Regional Council done in terms of looking into where they can partner with HCC around restoration? Admittedly, areas within the city that we can restore are going to be more difficult than farmland, and so may not get the same return on investment in terms of carbon, but at the same time they have big biodiversity gains for the city.
Yep. If I may talk about future briefly, and then I'll go to Blair for the to answer your question. Actually, it's we do have, you would have seen in Hamilton City Councillors in your calendar pop up a briefing on how Regional Council and Hamilton City Council can work together, or are working together, and we can have another chat about how we want to be working together going forward on biodiversity and biosecurity. So that's on the 22nd of March at about 10:30 to 12:30. So really keen to be forward focused there. But if I can go to you, Blair, to answer Sarah's question of backwards. I haven't been around that long.
I have, and it's been many years since I've been involved in on-the-ground biodiversity activities. So I'm not across the particular projects, but I am aware that our natural heritage people are working with yourselves in areas as well. I'm sorry, I can't be any more precise than that.
Yeah, because I want to learn the answer to that is why we arranged the briefing. So.
Cool, thanks for arranging that.
Right, thank you. Mangano?
Yep, tēnā korua, thank you for your presentation. We just had a presentation from Manaki from Waikato Tānu who shared their vision, and I see some alignment within the Regional Council. Obviously, there's a whole lot of partnership acknowledged there. I was really pleased to see the alignment to the SDGs, SDG 13, and it'd be good to see how we as a council, HCC, also contribute towards that overall target. But my question is around mātauranga Māori. We know the why, but I'm really keen to understand the how. And could you share some examples on how that's going to be applied in the context of this strategy?
Blair, do you want to say anything before I keep jumping in first?
No, I'm comfortable. Yeah.
Cool. So around the Mātauranga Māori piece, we have we've got briefed on it a while ago that we've put together a framework as to how we could work with iwi to understand their view of the world, Te Ao Māori view of the world, to then integrate into the work that we do. Whether that happens through the joint management agreements or whether that happens outside of that is depending on where work best sits. But that would be what I'd be looking towards, because that's a way to safeguard the knowledge from both parties, I guess, to what degree making sure it's interpreted correctly and to what degree it is shared afterwards, not just taking and running with it and then potentially it not being implemented in the way that it was intended. So really looking forward to working through that in a better way.
So it's still early stages, and because what I was trying to say is that what are some tangible examples of execution around the how? And the reason why I asked that, with all due respect, talking to the iwi is fantastic, but you've also got to talk to hapu, marae and whānau who are at the coalface, who are implicated by these issues. So I think it's a hierarchical, a multi-layered approach. And I'd be really keen to see how your mātauranga applies to other mātauranga as well, because there's only one mātauranga within the context of Arohi. Yeah. And how we use that to complement, obviously, our strategic approach inclusively.
Yeah, so one way that I'm thinking of, and that's another reason we organised the briefing on the 22nd of March, is because we did a bit of playing around with our integrated catchment management committee and its groups that feed up through that. So those groups are the ones that are supposed to function as giving us that language from on the ground, really.
Yeah, coalface, at the coalface.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. And so we don't really have that, I believe, for Hamilton City. And that's just where I'm trying to focus it to make the how really relevant. And because in the past we have had catchment community type groups, but they've been a bit of a larger sphere, for example, including Karapiro and towards Ngaruahia. And that just, I guess what ends up happening is that you talk about both the rural and the urban situation. And so we'd really like to make something that is very much relevant to all the participants involved, and just talk about the urban. So that is one opportunity to bring that in. That's what I would see as one of the hows.
Cool. Fit for purpose, eh? Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I am mindful of time. I can't see any more up on the screen. So
I've raised my hand, but I'm not a member of the committee. I've got. Do you not see my hand raised?
No, sorry.
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. Very briefly, totally endorse the points that Councillor McPherson has made, and I totally appreciate with the land transport area that particular legislative model, as far as a metro city is concerned, is definitely these days not fit for purpose. But as a metro city, we are but one voice, and I think we're drowned out by broader rural voices there. So certainly around the coffee table, around the mode change, I note that. I want to acknowledge, of course, obviously yourself, Councillor Strange, in particular for the work you're doing. Just the question I have, just if I may, in terms of the broader comms strategy around Waikato Regional Council's leadership in this area, what more do you think that can be done? I know you probably can never do enough, but it's just, this has been a really good presentation. But I'm thinking of taking the real leadership role that the regional council should have in this area, to reinforce that with a wider audience, particularly with a number of city residents.
Yes, so I haven't got anything planned directly at the moment, but that's not to say that the brains behind, don't. So one thing I want to mention is a way that I'm working on the leadership piece is to try and get the conversations going at the governance level. So you were hearing before through Blair that there are often a lot of staff at various councils talking to each other to try and progress the climate work stream at whatever stage they're at in their councils. But if the councillors themselves across the country aren't supported and aligned and so forth, then it's kind of a fight at it's a little battle everywhere you go. And so something I'm doing is hosting a phone call for councillors that are interested in climate action across the Waikato. So I have councillors from about 6 or 7 territorial authorities joining that once every 2 months. And thank you, Sarah, for popping in on that once or twice recently. And that's just evolving. Separately, I'm also through Facebook actually have been setting up a group of climate action across councils. And so that is for councillors to share with each other progress that's being made. And through that, I'm also looking at hosting soon a meeting an online meeting for regional councillors so that they can have their own specific sphere of discussion. So that is one piece that I'm working on the governance side. Then I suppose it's always this piece around, do you target the individual? And I noticed you were speaking about that with Manaki before as well. And while individual behaviour change is really important, it's the systemic stuff that is absolutely critical to get the most return on investment for the country. So that's where, it's great asking people to bike or cycle, but what's the most common thing that people say why they don't cycle? They don't feel safe. So we need to change the system to make them feel safe. And when I look at things like the Regional Land Transport Plan, and something like 35% is to do safety improvements, well, I'm pretty sure those safety improvements are mainly on roads. And if even some of that budget was to go towards more cycleways, you'd get people out of cars, which would also decrease the chance of road accident deaths quite a lot. So yeah, it's just a different thinking that's required, but all very, very open to have or partner on communications to individuals as well, especially in the city.
Certainly commend your excellent work and good luck.
Thanks. One step at a time.
Any other questions? I just want to wrap this one up. Great. Okay, then thank you very much, Councillor Jennifer and Leah. And yeah, look forward to this workshop that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Now,
Now, Amy, we need to move
Nami.
in. Sorry, I missed that.
Yes, we do need to move and second that item.
Okay, I'll move that we accept the item from Blair de Kevin Regional Council. Do I have a seconder? Just trying to scroll through. Thank you, Maxine. Councillor Maxine, second. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Cheers. All those against. Motion carried. Thank you very much. Now I am looking at my watch. I think we'll crack on with item 8, and we'll take a break after this item. So over to Charlotte.
Morning, Margaret, Councillor Margaret. Just a very quick update on this report. We've received information from the Climate Change Commission that the deadline has now been extended to the 28th of March, given that there was a lot of material for everyone to be reviewing and providing their submissions on. They've extended the deadline. So we have been taking a bit of extra time to put together the submission, and you'll be receiving the draft by Monday next week. So following today's meeting, we'll take what we hear today. We're also involved in a workshop tomorrow morning with local governments from other councils from across the country with the Commission to provide advice and to hear what other councils are saying. And then we'll be finishing off the submission to get to you by Monday next week.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do I have any questions? No. Look, at this stage, I would like to make an amendment to the staff recommendation. Notably that in C that date has changed from the 14th to the 28th. Does that lines up? Yes?
Yes.
Good. Also, in point 1, Sarah would like to be a part of this small committee. So can we add, please, that Environment Committee delegates the Chair and Deputy Chair of Environment Committee, Chair of Infrastructure Operations and Chair of Strategic Growth, work with staff to develop the Climate Change Commission submission. And with Deputy Chairs still alternates, correct. There we go. So I'll move that recommendation.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah. Now, do we have any other, I might have gone through it pretty quickly, but do we have any other questions about the report? It's pretty straightforward. No, I can't see any. Okay, look, that being the case, I don't really want to speak so much to the recommendation. It's pretty straightforward, and I look forward to receipt of the draft and getting together with members of the committee to put our submission forward. So we'll take it to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand.
That is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Charlotte. And I think on that note, we will take a short break. I think the open air burning bylaw is going to take a wee bit longer than 10 minutes. So let's break for morning tea now, and we'll come back at 11:10. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back, and we have a quorum. We've got some sitting down moves on there, Councillor Mark.
Yeah, I've had coffee, can you tell?
Okay, we've got a quorum, Amy?
Yes, we do.
Okay, let's get started. Okay, great. Item 9, let's get started with that Hamilton Open Air Burning Bylaw. And over to you, Sandra.
Yes, good morning, councillors. How are you today? Look, just before we get into the report itself, I'll just make a few additional notes as well as the report. The staff recommendation is to revoke the bylaw, which is quite a big call, but we would like to just highlight that the waste management and minimisation waste bylaw has the prohibition of the burning of rubbish in it. So I just wanted to highlight that, as I wanted to make sure that that particular part was coming across clearly in the report. Staff are discussing internal process changes to ensure that a response will still occur if somebody calls in with a concern about a fire. It won't be that we just tell them to go away. It will be, there will still be some sort of response, and then it will be over to the relevant unit to manage that, depending on whether it turns out to be a health issue or a rubbish fire or something that FINS should deal with. So there will be a process in place to manage complaints that come through the call centre. And we will continue to monitor the situation as well, given that there are multiple pieces of legislation and regulation covering this issue. That it is important to ensure that we have processes in place to make sure that the handovers are done smoothly. So any call outs will still be will still have a response to them. So I just wanted to just highlight those points, but other than that, I will take it that the report has been read and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm just scanning the screen to see if there are any hands up for questions.
Councillor Mark and Councillor Thomas.
Okay, so I'll take, sorry, Councillor Sarah first and then Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Thanks to your report on this, that ended up being a different result than we were first expecting. But I was just interested in our current bylaw has, looking at the table that you provided, our current bylaw has some stuff around how someone is burning things in a brazier or whatever it is in an incinerator, ensuring that it's not creating some safety issue or a particular nuisance. Just, I'm interested in what gaps, would we be leaving any gaps in terms of things that we should kind of enforce by completely kind of getting rid of the bylaw, revoking it? Or do you kind of see them as not significant?
When we had a very close look at the complaints information that had come in over the last few years, we identified that there was perhaps a small number of perhaps 20 or 30 complaints coming in, which may fall into a little bit of a grey area. While there are regulations and legislation that would cover them, we do still feel that a council response would be needed for those. And we would ensure that council processes are in place so there was still something in place. There's a bit of a grey area. Often what happens is compliance officers get to a call out and they can't find any evidence that a fire is there. So there are a lot of call outs where it's unclear as to actually what's going on. And we might get multiple call outs for a single smoky fire that's there, but when we get there, there's nothing there. Most complaints that are validated are dealt with just by having conversations with the person who has the fire. So a lot of it would still be dealt with in that same way of simply the graduated response system that council enforcement officers use. So we feel it's not necessarily a gap, but it's an area where we would continue to have a response in order to identify whether it was a health issue, whether it was a FENS issue, whether it was a waste management issue, where it went.
Okay, but ultimately, like if something wasn't the environmental issue or a particular safety issue, like those more extreme examples of things, then you would assume that it's probably just going to be a more minor nuisance to the neighbour.
That's right.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sandra. Councillor Mark.
Thanks, Chair Margaret. Thanks for this, Sandra. I'm sort of coming at this from a slightly different angle as a bit of a fan of the slow cooker barbecue and the smoky old charcoal, etc. I'm just wondering, so let me get this right. You're suggesting, or staff is suggesting, that we drop our bylaw in favour of the existing central regulations. Is that right?
It's a combination of the changes to the FENS Act, the fact that the Waste Management and Minimisation Bylaw has a prohibition, the Waikato Regional Council Regional Plan, which has regulations around open air burning, existing health legislation, and also, sort of the low level response that council has. We feel that it's covered with all of those.
Okay, I just need to delve into a couple of details then from that angle. Who determines nuisance? So, for example, when you light a fire, smoke goes up, and unless there is absolutely no wind and it's going straight up, it will go over to the neighbour's place for a wee while. Who determines nuisance? I mean, can you have a lot of these vexatious complaints that are going to suddenly take up a lot of fire resource time because someone's annoying someone with the smoke going onto the washing or whatever it is? Is that a danger?
Councillor Mark, or good morning, councillors. I wonder if I might be able to butt in and try and answer that one for you.
Sure.
Currently, so we deal with a couple of hundred complaints a year on average, and they tend to fall into principally two categories: situations where there has been a breakdown in relationship between two neighbours, and so we have repeating complaints about every time a neighbour lights their barbecue, puts their smoker on, and so, or we have in instances where people have a lowered tolerance, whether that be for medical or some other reason, or just a general lowered tolerance to dealing with these things. We have contractors who attend on our behalf. They attend all these incidents, and we are looking to always find a base solution at the lowest level, and it's often around engagement. Yes, it's not what the complaint is worded as, it's how we actually get the resolution of that. Look, about 60% of the time that we attend, there is no evidence, or we are unable to find that there is anything in favour of what the complaint is. The rest we try and mitigate out with some general conversation. That aspect's not going to change. All we're going to simply do is move it from under this bylaw to that same response being under the Waste Minimisation and Management Bylaw.
Yeah. So it partially addresses my question, but the question was, who is the judge and jury in this situation?
The judge and jury is our contractors who attend.
Right, okay.
Which are the same contractors who attend our noise complaints and are the arbiters of whether or not the noise is unreasonable as required under the Resource Management Act. So This is not new in terms of them having to exercise judgment in those areas.
Okay. Because there's a growing popularity in these braziers and smokers and stuff, and anyone can whiz off down to Mitre 10 and buy one. Couple of questions on those. When you're defining a fire pit or an outdoor cooking device, does it have to be like a bought, manufactured and guaranteed one, or can someone whip one up in their backyard and out of a row of bricks and stuff? Are both of those technically fired devices? Because there's no definition in there of those things. So if I want to light a fire in the back, all I've got to do is put 2 rows of bricks up, and that technically is non-combustible, and it will contain the fire. But is that legal, or are we sort of leaving ourselves a bit open there?
That's for the extension to the bylaw, which is the opposite of what we're actually recommending. So but in essence, I don't think we can get into that depth of in a bylaw, into that depth of definition. I'm unaware of any standards that exist that could actually be portrayed into what is that. And if it's homemade, it's not about, in my view, whether it's homemade, it's actually whether it's going to contain everything within that in a safe manner.
Okay. And the other question I had too, and so I won't take up all your time, Madam Chair, it was around the 3 metre rule. I mean, I don't know, that means you're going to have 9 square metres of section, and I don't know many sections that have 9 square metres of backyard. Are we getting ourselves into a spot of pickle there? Because I know a lot of these braziers and stuff are very self-contained and very safe. Are we going to be forcing people into breaking the law pretty quickly with that? Is that reasonable?
Councillor Mark, if I can again try and get in, that's not a new provision. That's been in since 2015 when the bylaw was first introduced. So none of that is new. We've worked with that. It hasn't been an issue. We've been able to, and to ameliorate on the couple of minor instances that I'm aware of where we had people who were had a fire of some description, whether it was a brazier or whatever it was, that was very close to bushes or to a fence where it caused alarm to a neighbour. We attended, we dealt with those, and we moved on. So after 5 years of experience of this, my feedback would be that hasn't been an issue.
Okay, no, look, if you're comfortable with it, because you're the guys in the field, I'm fine with that. It's just I know a lot of people with these sort of braziers that that have them technically a lot closer than 3 metres, and they seem quite safe. But if it's not an issue, or it hasn't been a problem so far, I'm pretty relaxed about it.
We don't have anyone racing around with tape measures trying to measure whether it's 3 metres from a boundary or whatever else. We only attend in relation to when there is a complaint about it.
Yeah. No. Okay. No, that's all good. No, that's all I got. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Thanks for those questions, Mark. And thanks for the answers too, Kelvin. I think that made things a lot clearer. Now, I do have a mover for the staff recommendation A and B. I believe that's Councillor O'Leary.
Sorry, Margaret.
Sorry, welcome there.
No, I'm having no, thank you. No worries. It's just I've had a few technological glitches from my new. Anyway, that's all good. Just in terms of what Kelvin was saying before, the fire service can come out. Can the fire service come out and they can put out a incinerator that's not a compliant incinerator, or a fire that they consider to be not safe? They can do that anyway under their own jurisdiction, or not? Did I miss that? Is Kelvin gone?
No, the latest advice, we've got some substantial advice from FENS, and they are suggesting that it is at best, in their words, debatable whether they would have a lawful mandate without council entering into a contractual arrangement with FENS. They are adamant that their powers relates to an emergency situation for which they have power of entry and they can put out the fire. They are suggesting that in the absence of there being a contractual arrangement of some detail in there, and being made authorised officers under our bylaw and a range of other things, that they would be unwilling, I think is the word that I took away from their advice.
Okay, I think there have been examples of the fire service turning up in the past and putting out people's fires.
There have indeed been examples of that, Mayor Paula, and they have been very supportive of what we have tried to do. It was when we got the advice, the most recent advice, which was only sort of a month ago, that we got that from FENS. It was somewhat of a departure, but it came from their national office. And so I took from that this was something that they were receiving queries on around the country.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Paula. All good questions. So I do have a mover, and can we have that up on the board, please, Amy? Board.
Absolutely, Carmen's just going to bring that up.
Thank you. So that was A and B receives the report. Yep. I'm happy to second that. Right, well, questions have been asked, so it's now time for debate. Councillor Leary, do you want to start?
Yeah, just quickly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I was quite pleasantly surprised, and I think staff were as well, when they did some work on this and found that our waste minimisation plan sets the boundaries and allows for some enforcement in this area, so that the bylaw can be disposed of. I guess over the years I've been on council, the only complaint that I've ever had, which has come, semi-regularly over those years, is when people are burning rubbish, and particularly plastic, in an incinerator in their back garden. I did, when we had some information sent out a while ago on this, I did chat to Calvin about the possibility of banning incinerators from backyards. I actually don't think in a residential built-up area that it's appropriate, but that was possibly a step too far. So I guess unless people complain about the smell of meat on a barbecue, the only time I complain about barbecue in the neighbourhood is because I'm not invited. So I think we're quite safe there. So I just really do want to thank staff for the in-depth work they've done on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Angela. Councillor Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'll support this, and again, thank the staff as Angela did there before. I'd just suggest that we do keep an eye on it though, because fire pits, barbecues, etc., are developing in popularity in a major way, and sections are getting smaller. So this won't be something that we can put there for the next 10 years. Things are changing. I mean, I think the intention of this obviously is about rubbish burning, and I think this captures it well. I'm glad we haven't got a bylaw on top of another law as well. So happy to support it, but I'll be watching carefully and listening to the complaints as they come through. And Angela, you're welcome to a barbecue at my place, although the smells aren't necessarily that good when I get cooking, I can tell you.
Oh, promises, Mark. You've been promising.
Oh, all right, and you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm just wonder, because I take your point, Councillor Mark, about things moving quickly, and I just wonder if it would be appropriate, if Councillor Angela, if we added in another small part to this recommendation, that we have a status update just on where we are at with numbers and what are the nature of complaints, rather than waiting for 12 months or thereabouts, that we maybe have a report come back to, not the next one, but the number 3 council meeting, Environment Council meeting, just so that there's a little bit of transparency and maybe a little bit of comfort too around this current decision.
I'm happy to do that, but I don't think that would be enough time, given we've got to go out for consultation as well. Maybe check with staff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Perhaps we make that recommendation after the consultation if we still need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
but
cool.
Point noted.
Really good. Okay, then, any other speakers? Great, let's put that to the vote. Just a show of hands to be fine. All those in favour, please raise your hand. You got the numbers there, Amy? All those against, raise your hand. Thanks, Amy. I can't see.
Mayor Southgate, can I just confirm that you are dissenting?
And that now you are just moving your lips.
Okay, so the motion is carried unanimously.
I still amend it.
Okay, great, thank you. Cool, item 10, I think that should be environmental principles. So are we hearing from Sarah?
Thank you, Councillor Margaret. I'll just take the report as read and answer any questions.
Councillor Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. I was just having another look at this morning, and I was wondering what some of the word language meant and what the difference was between, say, mitigate, minimise, and then you've got promote, encourage, invest. So there's just, do they have, particularly the difference, say, between mitigate and minimise, do they have a significant impact on how we actually approach these principles?
So in terms of the sub points that we've put
Yes,
underneath, I think it's aligning with what we've already put out there in terms of our language. So we looked across what we've already said. So in our strategic priorities document and in other plans across council, we tried to align our language best to what we've already committed to, so that we can then use these to embed what we're already doing, but also taking that next step further through the policy development as well.
So, like, for example, if we're saying we're promoting, I don't have the wording in front of me, but low carbon forms of transport or something like that, does that mean we're just kind of trying to encourage people to use it, or does that actually include investing in it as well, or making decisions that I guess encourage people to use our transport system in that way when we're designing things, just to understand that.
I guess the principle is that the transitioning to a low carbon future. So that's what we're trying to focus on as being a high level one. Look, in terms of the promote low carbon and active transport, that's definitely something that's happening. However, the details around it and how it's all going to, I guess, change over time is a lot more complex than we can really capture in a principle and in the sub points there. So I guess, and this is where the challenge is, obviously the principles are really important in trying to guide decisions being made across council, but we actually need to then now go do the work that will come in through that climate change strategy that we've been talking about in terms of how that will then look for the longer term and what does that really mean, and unpacking it further.
Okay, yeah, no, that's all good. Thank you.
Councillor Sarah, can I just add something as well? I thought just in terms of that promoting, the conversation that was you had this morning with the regional council in terms of, you know, some of the work that we're trying to do with them is around that promotion partnership type approach. I think that's what we're thinking about under that first principle bullet point. And then the last bullet point under that principle talks about actually through the creation of a 20-minute city, which I think covers your question about actually, does that mean we're actually going to do something physically?
That's a good point. Yeah. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? Okay, that being the case,
sorry, Norm.
Yep,
sorry. More of an acknowledgement for the work that's done, but given the two presentations that we've had this morning from the tribe and regional council, it's the common language, but semantics are different. So I think there's alignment in terms of principles, but one thing that is that's universal is actually the cultural principles that align the whole three strategies. It's actually really around the how. So maybe it's just the semantics around some of the key changes in terms of wording could be slightly tweaked. And I'm happy to work with the team on that if required.
That would be appreciated.
Yep. Got it.
Yeah, look, Thanks, Norm, for your input, but I'm just not sure how that, I mean, we're about to go with the staff recommendation or not. So are you wanting to work more on the wording of these principles or at the next level around the detail?
Probably the next level, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just to complement the 3 strategies.
Yeah.
At the level, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, please? Shall I go? Well, I'll move the staff recommendation A through C. And do we have a seconder? Just trying to scroll through.
Mango Norm.
Thank you. Thanks, Mango Norm. Any debate? Okay. Seeing none, well, let's put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Moving along, item 11. General Manager support from Sean.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, Charlotte's actually going to talk to this one as well. So it's just the only update in here is around the climate action plan. So Charlotte is just going to talk briefly to that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just the key thing that we have done recently with the climate action plan is to get our emissions profile done for the last financial year, which showed that we'd actually reduced emissions by 4.5%. And obviously we know that quite a bit of this is to do with COVID and the changes in the way that we were working in that time. But it'll be interesting to see how we continue with that over the year, this year, with the new ways of working and the flexible approach that we're taking. And also that we will be bringing a more detailed update around the actions to the June meeting for the climate change action plan as well.
Good, okay, thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Dave.
Sorry, Margaret, got it now. Charlotte, I'm looking at the attachment and I'm sort of distinctly underwhelmed and actually question whether some of these things that we have supposedly done are things that have helped the environment, or we've just sort of lumbered in a few things and hope that it looks good. And I'll give you there's quite a lot of examples. Investigate the sources of our city's carbon footprint further. We did ask to do that, but I think it's sort of been done by the regional council and also by inference the Climate Change Commission. I'll just go through the examples. That was in the build our understanding box at the top. I'm not sure what we've done as a council there, extra. Another one, which I meant to raise with the regional council as well, very ironic that we call deliver our emissions reduction roadmap, that we're using the term roadmap, and they use the term roadmap as well. I think we need to change terminology, and so do they. Pathway would be okay, roadmap's not okay. They use both, we're only using roadmap. So that's a suggestion. Now, the 500,000 to finalise delivery of the Waikato Transport Hub, we spent I was going to say a shitload, but I'm not allowed to say that in council meetings, more money than 500,000 on that in the last year. So I think that's add a zero and we'd be closer there in the last year. I'm puzzled about the 2.3 million in improvements to the bus transport network. I haven't noticed that amount of improvements. In fact, I've noticed a handful of raised curbs for disability access and not much else. And I don't think it's 2.3 million worth. If it is, then I'm in the wrong business. And developing business cases for the two of the bottom three are developing business cases for NZTA. I don't regard them as an advantage towards coping with climate change, because they're not actually implementation. I don't think we should, I mean, all they are is, in fact, is killing more trees because they're providing more paper to NZTA. Seriously, don't think they should be counted or countable. And the other one, implementation of transport optimization projects for traffic flow efficiency. I get the point that the claim, which is probably accurate by John Kinghorn, that it means less petrol or diesel is used, but I don't know whether that's the sort of change that we're wanting to see referred to in our climate change reporting. We're wanting to see change of mode shift and information on that. How many people switched completely out of vehicles, not whether we saved a few percentage points in petrol and diesel, but we're still using it all over the place, if you get what I mean. So I just think that all reads wrong, completely wrong, actually, that report, apart from the roadmap bit.
No, disagree with that too. I would just like to go back to Charlotte and Julie, or whichever staff member would like to talk to those points that you've raised, Dave. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I'll just make a comment first, and then I might let Charlotte talk to some of the specifics. But that diagram you're referring to, so that's not something new that's being reported to this committee as seeking approval for that plan. So that was part of the climate action plan. Yeah, that was approved by the committee. On the, I think with the investing in the sources of the city's carbon footprint, the city has quite a different profile to the regional council. So you might have picked up when the regional council's presentation, they noted that emissions from agriculture was the primary source of emissions in the region. In Hamilton City, we did a city-specific profile, and agriculture is, I think, 1% or less than 1% of our emissions. Transport at the regional level was about 16, and for us, I don't have it. I haven't got it in front of me at the moment, but it was, yeah. So just in terms of what we have done versus what the regional council has done, there is quite a different piece of work that has been sort of completed there. I think the roadmap versus pathway, just a terminology thing, I think, wasn't it? That was the other. It's, in terms of those transport investments, the 500,000 and the 2.3 million. So they were the investments that we had put into the annual plan for this current financial year. I think it would be when, as Charlotte said, when we report back to the June committee to report fully on, because we will be close to the end of the financial year then, to report on each of these things in terms of what we have actually done in respect to those things. And I think and some of those other things that you sort of talked about were the actions were development of the plans and the business cases, which obviously may not have an impact immediately, but I think the work is still necessary to get the impacts downstream. Charlotte, do you want to comment further on those points?
Well, sorry, just to wrap up there though, why are we getting this if we've already got it before? I understand that we'd seen this before, but
that was
anything.
Well, it was a reference point. So we were updating on just a couple of the key actions that have taken place in the last quarter. So since the last Environment Committee, so the body of the report was talking about the Climate Action Plan update, and so we were including the one-page summary of the Climate Action Plan as a reference point, so that's what we're reporting against, basically. And when we come back with the report in June, we will have a fuller report on everything that's in the Climate Action Plan.
Okay, well, it just says that to me that we need something radically different if we're to actually affect some of the Climate Change Commission's thinking.
Absolutely. So, and I think that's a really good point, Councillor Dave. And I think so. There's another piece of work which is the longer range climate strategy, this Climate Action Plan was what are we getting underway this year, so in the current year, and Charlotte and team are working on the climate strategy, which is the longer term piece of work, which is which will inform some of those bigger things that we need to do.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted Charlotte's, but it was some more. I'm just concerned that we're halfway through the term of this council, and we've got something that talks about a whole lot of business cases. There's only one that talks about implementation, and that's for reducing petrol but still keeping it.
Yeah, and I think when I came into the role, there were bits and pieces that are happening all across the organisation where we are doing some good work, but what we need is that longer piece, the term piece around the climate change strategy, and that's what we're starting to get developed at the moment. So working with our climate change steering group internally to really set, okay, what is our vision, what is our future state, and what are our key sectors? So that piece that you mentioned around investigating further in our emissions, while saying that 62% comes from land transport is helpful, it actually doesn't really guide how do we make the best decisions around reducing emissions from transport if we actually don't know the makeup of where that's coming from. So that information is purely driven by petrol sales in the city. That doesn't really give us that much information to go on where that's being used, what different types of transport. So we need to delve down and look at the data we currently have and align that with the transport emissions data and work out so we can get a better picture of how do we create change in emissions.
But I thought that information, I've seen graphs from over a year ago showing the breakup of light vehicles, freight and things like that in Hamilton, as well as in the Waikato and nationally.
It shows, yes, but it doesn't show. So say, for example, corporate fleet like DHB and the likes, who actually are just buying their fuel through their centralized system, that sort of information, we don't really know where it's actually being used. So there is some information around light vehicles versus freight in terms of rail, and there's rail emissions as well. But actually in what we got provided, it doesn't break down beyond that in terms of what we can then influence and have change.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that. With the 2.3 million in the bus transport network, maybe say this to Sean, you've got just under 4 months to get it spent, because it sure as hell isn't spent yet.
Yeah, so I'll follow that one up to see where it's at. If there's some information we can send around in the interim, then I'll do that.
No, I'm just sort of saying that we're struggling to see the evidence, because we've been pushing for these for probably 3 years. There was money in the transport budget previously to do a lot of that work that never got spent, and we're just about finished the triennium that it was for.
Okay. Yeah, I'll follow that one up, actually. So that hasn't come through the Infrastructure Ops Committee, Councillor Angela?
That was the transport improvements budget of 22 million per year or something like that.
So perhaps I can help councillors. It's Robin Denton here. I think that 2.3 million was probably the mass transit line items, Councillor Dave, which are being caught up as part of the metrospatial plan and those other sorts of things. So I'll catch up with Sean and Charlotte to make sure that we actually had the right figures in there.
Yeah, so I don't doubt that they were in budgets, but we all know that that's all been delayed.
Correct.
Yeah, apart from planning work.
Right. Thanks, Dave, for those questions.
Thank you.
Councillor Mark, you're next.
Thanks, Chair Margaret. This is sort of a question for Charlotte and Sean, and I noticed Julie sitting there as well. And it's a weird one hidden right at the very back. It says in their engagement section that it's low-level significance, etc. Can I just challenge you on that one? Because it's a pretty passionate subject out there, and I'm just wondering, are we actually maximising the work we do? Are we demonstrating this enough in the community? Could we be putting, press releases out for jolly well everything we're doing here? Because it's quite significant. And often we get accused of doing nothing when all this sort of stuff goes on in the background. So I guess what I'm asking is, are you happy with the level of communication that we're putting out to the community on this?
I think I'll start and Julie can probably jump in, but just in terms of when we're assessing significance in the context of reports to committees and council, it's about the significance of the decision. So the significance here is about receiving the report. So it's an update report. So that in itself isn't significant. The underlying kind of issues and topics of climate change are obviously hugely significant and important. So it's not meant to imply that it's not meant to imply that that's not significant. So in terms of engagement being required, there's not engagement required to the community on this decision, and that's what the report is saying. Okay. I think your other point around how we communicate what we are doing to the community is really valid. So we do try as much as possible to issue, if it's media releases, to put out relevant things, and off the back of this committee meeting, there would be another media release reporting on what we're doing. I think that's one of the benefits of having this as a committee, that we do pull together some of the issues that may get dealt with through strategic growth or infrastructure operations or community committees. The benefit of having this committee receiving information or updates on some of those things collectively is that we can kind of tell a more of a holistic story around our environmental actions and impact.
Yeah, and I guess if I could just sort of stretch it out a wee bit, Madam Chair, and when the climate change emergency debate came around, we all put our hands on our chest and said, look, we're actually doing stuff without having to declare an emergency. So I guess we kind of open ourselves up for a certain amount of accountability in the future. So I wonder if this, if I'm just, and I'm getting more comfortable with it, but are we telling that story and selling that story enough, I guess, in the community? So yeah, that's where I was going with that one.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, I'll take that on board.
Yeah,
not a biggie. Thank you.
I think it's a very good point. The number of times that I've had just members of the public or even colleagues asking, well, how are we getting on? And we are doing things, but we're not communicating that clearly enough, and probably regularly enough to our audiences. So I think it's a really good point. Sarah, I've got you next, but I just want to take the opportunity, while we're talking about communicating what things that we are doing, et cetera, on our climate action plan, the point around natural environment, I think would be really helpful. I keep harping on about this, but it would be really helpful to include in here, I think, an up-to-date tally of the number of trees that we've planted across the city. And I know that we are keeping an organisational tally on what that looks like. So, I mean, planting trees, sequestering CO2, that's a pretty big action, and reporting against, or just letting people know what we're doing.
Councillor Margaret, that is, we've heard you say that, and it is one of the things that we are including in our wellbeing and our priority reporting, and we're actually coming to a briefing tomorrow to talk about some of those things. So I'll just double check and make sure that's in there, but we had picked up as that one of the key things that you wanted to know.
Thank you, Julie. I just think planting trees is such a huge part of climate action, and for it to be reported in our climate action document, I think that would be a really appropriate place for it. I mean, it's not...
So we'll make a note of that for the June report, that when we're reporting against the actions in the climate action plan, that we'll bring information under that natural environment section. What information we do have on trees and number, etc., we'll include as part of our report on that.
Great, thank you very much. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair Margaret. My question was just following up from some of Dave's comments around transport and business cases and the like. Ultimately, the amount that we can do in this space is going to be heavily influenced by what funding comes through from Waka Kotahi or central government. So I think a critical action for this committee would be to make sure that we've got a good advocacy plan in place beyond just the Climate Commission report, but also what influence, and we've got our RLTP submissions coming up too, but what else can we be doing to be making sure that central government is very aware of this issue? Because currently, from August onwards, for the next 3 years, at least 90% of the transport budget is taken up. So what more can we be doing in this space? Right now there's very little room for any new projects, including our own.
Robert, I'm not sure if that's something that you are able to comment on.
So just, I guess it does follow on from Councillor Dave's comments. And yes, I think perhaps one of the areas that we can pick up perhaps moving forward is the advocacy role and opportunities that we have through a number of mechanisms, such as the GPS at the highest level, government policy statement or position statement on land transport, the Waka Kotahi investment program, the regional land transport plan. So all of those are really important things for us to advocate to, such that it at least holds some doors open for us to be able to get some co-investment and more funding into the more active modes and public transport. So I'm certainly happy to work with Sean and Sarah, Julie and Charlotte on just perhaps some of the ways that we can word this. It's things like those business cases. They are really a means to trying to unlock funding and to enable us to deliver some of these activities moving forward. So yeah, I think that's probably all I can say.
Do you think we could do more in terms of some messaging around what we actually want in the bigger picture? Like in the bigger picture, we won't need the next GPS to have a much bigger bucket of funding for walking and cycling, or there may be other measures that we are advocating for, but are we able to have some discussion around what we actually need from central government to enable us to do this stuff? And then we've got a clear message that we put forward as a council.
I think that's where these business cases will be really valuable, because they will actually set out and reflect what the community is saying to us, as well as what government's saying to us through the climate change sort of direction. They will give us some really good information about what actually needs to be done out on the network, and in reality what that will cost. So I think that once we have those to hand, they will give us some really good factual information that we've worked out with Waka Kotahi, that provides that platform for actually going, to do this change is going to cost a lot of money, and it's not something that you can achieve by just fiddling around the edges. If you really want to get good facilities out there, particularly for cycling that are safe, that takes work, and it's work, physical work, as well as the whole engagement and working with communities and all of that sort of change, behaviour change that's needed to achieve that. And if we're serious about climate change and we're serious about getting people out of the cars, then we have to give them something that is a viable alternate, a viable and safe alternate, and that takes money at the end of the day.
And just to add to that as well, so this year the government will be consulting on their emissions reduction plan, which will have transport will be one of the key sector areas as well, which will be around where they're going to say they're going to be sort of aligning their funding for the next 3 years around climate change and transport, and that will be a key opportunity to input into that area as well.
Just as an example, Ireland has recently committed that 20% of their transport budget goes to walking and cycling as part of their response. So that's the kind of, I guess, level of direction that I'm looking at. You know, we actually potentially join up with other councils and provide that direction to central government as to what we're expecting. So thank you. I guess we'll keep that conversation going.
Great, thank you, Sarah, for those questions, and Robin and Charlotte for your very clear responses. I've got a question from Mayor Paula.
Thank you. I can't find my little hand up on my new laptop, working it out. Sorry. Just in terms of the broader thing, I know that this submission is focused heavily on the transport because it's the biggest area of emissions. Having said that, there's a lot of work that we do in our council that could usefully be supported that is climate mitigation, and I don't see enough mention of that. And is there some reason why there isn't a mention around the green space, the gully restoration, the climate low carbon developments, and those broader pictures as well? Because the way I see it is that to really tackle climate, we have to come at it from all angles. We have to build resilient communities, we have to build more low carbon options into the way we build our houses. We're already proposing a reasonably ambitious program of gully restoration and green space restoration, which of course is all very good in terms of offsetting. It's not the biggest slice of the pie, I do acknowledge that, but I wonder why we're not strengthening that too, and talking to government in the broad about how they can assist us in those areas as we develop new communities, as we develop our green space.
I agree with you, Mayor Paula, that those are areas that we have to be focused on. And as you just mentioned around urban form, that's enabling low carbon lifestyles. If we don't do our urban form and our design right, we're actually locking in our communities to living in high carbon ways, which is at the worst, it's high carbon, but also it's actually going to be high cost into the future when carbon's, you know, the cost of carbon is going to continue to increase. So through the Climate Change Commission submission process, we are going to be strongly advocating around nature-based and urban form in our draft submission to get your feedback on that. And then I think that's the other next step is around that emissions reduction plan that the government is developing, as well as the RM reforms, that we need to be strongly advocating into those processes as well, to make sure that the way that they're looking at it is holistically as a community outcomes, rather than looking at it in this very narrow emissions focused way that they currently are, where that, you know, just looking at transport as one element rather than looking at it as the whole system.
Yeah, so can we strengthen it in this, at least strengthen the reference to it, so there is tangible cross-referencing? I mean, it's, you start off in the broad and then you go down into transport, and then it still sort of stays there. Can we not lift up those views that that you and I both agree should be represented?
We will definitely be doing that going forward with our climate change strategy development for the long-term planning. Definitely, that's one of the lenses that we've been looking at it through. I think for this one, it was approached in that way because it was, what are we doing this year to deliver in these key areas. But yes, we'll definitely take that on board in the way we're communicating and reporting back. We can make sure that that alignment is there.
So we'll see that before anything hits government. We won't. This isn't going ahead of that. We'll see the full detail of the submission before it goes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. That will be sent out next week.
Okay, that's cool. I was a bit worried, Chair Margaret, because the concentration was just on one area of transport. And I think it's a much more complex and broad arena when you're dealing with climate. Just to say also, I was listening with interest in Dave's comments about moving away from fossil fuel driven transport economies. The other area that I think we could focus on again is building that 20-minute city concept that we've been promoting in Wellington that's getting good traction. That should be in there. So, you know, it's about how you design your communities to minimize unwanted trips, etc. But also that apart from cycling, which is one way of getting around, lime scooter and goodness knows what else, I think there is also pedestrianism and a focus on being able to invest in multimodal journeys that include a bit of walking is also something to flag.
Thank you. Look, just to be clear, the last points that you've just been mentioning, Mayor Paula, is about our submission to the Climate Change Commission, yes? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to go with too much of a narrow focus because I know what the conversations in sitting on the governance and strategy panel at the local government New Zealand. I know what the conversations are, and they come at it from all tangible options. But also the support that we're seeking from government needs to be the support that will help us do our work as a city council. And we know that we're coming from climate in many ways, and that's why I have been asking for a one place portal for everything that this council is doing that has a relevant benefit on climate, and I haven't seen that yet. So I'm just wondering where that is, so that, you know, because when we get people in the public saying, what is the city council doing about climate? There's no one place to go and say, well, here it is. We have to go, well, you know, we're doing sustainable subdivision over here. We're doing green space in this portfolio. We're doing low carbon technology in this portfolio. We're doing. And it's not easy to bring people on a story if we don't have one. And it's not about creating something new. It's about drawing those strands together into a story that we can actually genuinely use as councillors when we're talking with the community about next steps. So do we know what's happening with that?
Just to sort of provide you a little bit of context, I'm not sure whether you were here at the start when we did talk about that in one of the items. Councillor Mark brought it up and said, look, what's our communication like? We're doing certain things and we're doing lots of things, but how well are we telling that story to our public? So yes, certainly that's been brought up, but having a portal, a website portal, wasn't mentioned, so that's certainly a great idea. But yeah, just over to staff. Sean?
Yeah, just to say, Chair Margaret, I have asked James to direct this to staff, and I've asked that this work be considered so that we all have the information at hand. And I'm just not sure where that piece of work's gone. Thank you.
So yes, the purpose of the climate action plan is to bring those various strands together. So lots of those, as you sort of have various councillors have pointed out, a lot of those strands sit, you know, in the transport or waters that the substantive projects are reported through to various other committees, and the benefit of having them come through in a climate action plan is like a big part of the benefit is actually being able to tell a holistic story to the community. I think what I've heard loud and clear is that we need to be, so that June report where we're reporting back on the climate action plan needs to be really full in terms of capturing all of those things that are happening across the organisation that are contributing to climate, and also that the communication that goes around that, not just in terms of media release, but also in terms of the information that we put up on our website, that is regularly updated, so that we are keeping that progress well communicated for all the members of the community that are sort of deeply interested in this. So there is information, and we do update the website and fairly regularly anyway. But what we'll do off the back of this meeting is make sure that kind of go and have a review of that and make sure that that is telling the story that we want it to tell.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. I haven't got any more questions up on my screen. So, with that being the case, sorry, I'll just go back to the staff recommendation that we receive the report. Point 2, that the Environment Committee receives the report. I'll move that, and I will have a seconder.
Dave said he was going to.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Councillor Dave. Seconder. Any discussion? There's been a fair bit already, but does anybody like to make a bit of a point before we vote? Okay. Right. We'll put it to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Great. Thank you. Well, that brings our meeting to a conclusion. I just want to thank you all very much for your patience, for your participation, and for your general taking part in such a collaborative and collegial way. So thank you all so much, and thank you to staff as well for the information provided today. It really helped in our decision making, and to our governance staff. Thank you very much, Amy and Carmen and Becca. Cheers.
Should we close, Madam Chair?
Oh yes, thank you. Won't have a song today, but
we'll just do a quick karakia. Yeah.
Yep.
Given we open with one. Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, let us close our meeting. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pauna mi te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. Āmene. And translated, may peace be widespread, may the sea glisten like greenstone, may a pathway for all of us on this day give love, receive love, let us respect each other.
Beautiful, thank you.
Kia ora.
Right, so on that lovely note, well, we'll close today's meeting. Thank you so much.